Hey, Push, it is time to start a new unit, which is a big undertaking, but I want to give you the outline for Unit 4, which, time period 4. And so what we're doing in this video is we are contextualizing the time period. We're trying to understand what's the big picture, and then subsequent videos will go into detail on all of these. So your goal here, of course, is the big picture. What is it that we're going to study in this unit? So if we're looking at this time period, the first thing we're looking at are the turning point dates. So what are the dates that represent the beginning what are the events that represent the beginning and the end? So the first one is 1800, which is the election of Jefferson. And we have already spoken about this one because this is also the turning point date that represents the end of time period 3. So this is the first transfer of power to an opposing political party in the United States, in terms of political power. And the end of this time period is 1848, and this is the Seneca Falls Convention. This is the first formalized call for the women's vote. And this is also, it kind of represents a culmination of a nationalizing period when the United States was going from being a brand new country into a developed country socially, politically, economically. And so these women will use the Declaration of Independence as a model for their Declaration of Rights and Sentiments, where they formally call for the women's vote. So this time period is all about the United States developing as a new nation into an established nation. So we're going to be looking the big ones politically, economically, socially. We'll also be looking at things like American identity and geography. We're going to see land added to the United States during this time period. So let's go through the topics for this unit. And I just want to give you kind of an overview for each of the topics. So topic 4.2 is the rise of political parties in the era of Thomas Jefferson. So this topic is basically Thomas Jefferson's presidency. What we're going to see when we study this, this is 1800 to 1808. Political parties are going to continue to debate domestic and foreign issues, things like involvement in Europe and which side of the war with we're shifting from the French Revolution into Napoleon now, but which side of the war will the United States find itself on? And domestic issues are going to center around things like trade policy, tariffs, building of roads, things like that. So we'll take a look at that. The second one is the Supreme Court. During Thomas Jefferson's presidency, the Supreme Court will come into its own as an equal branch of government. So it will figure out what it is supposed to be doing. And then lastly, a major event during Jefferson's presidency is the purchase of Louisiana. As you can see pictured behind me, this is the Louisiana Territory. And with this addition of land, we're going to see the United States start to move into actually really seeking to control events in North America. So the United States is going to start trying to assert itself as the major power player in North America. So that's 4.2. In 4.3, we're going to be looking at politics and regional interests. Now, this is a trend that occurs throughout this time period. But we're going to see that although a national identity is forming, regional concerns are going to be the basis for many politicians' positions, especially on slavery and economic policy. And the idea of putting regional concerns over the national interest is called sectionalism. And what we see, this image behind me is a kind of crude, simplified version of what we're going to be looking at. So we're going to have the North will have similar economic interests. The southern states will have similar economic interests. And then the West is going to be a factor here because the West is going to develop as a kind of third region, and the West often acts as the tiebreaker. So what we see, and we'll look into specific events, but we're going to see the North versus the South, and then on every issue, it seems to be the tiebreaker seems to be which side is the West on in this issue. So we're going to be looking at this growing sectionalism that's occurring in the United States in the first half of the 1800s. Okay, for section 4.4 or topic 4.4, we're looking at the United States on the world stage. So it's called America on the world stage. And what we see is that the United States, as a brand new country, was weak. So over the course of these 50 years, 1800 to 1848, the U.S. is struggling to create an independent global presence, and they're trying to bring new territory or seeking new territory in North America and promoting global trade. Okay, that's pretty understandable, but there is a major like doctrine or policy announced by the United States in 1823 called the Monroe Doctrine. This is the Monroe Doctrine basically says that the United States will be the policeman of North America. And it's really fun to learn about this one because the United States was not strong enough to back up their claims. But the U.S. did it. It was kind of like a political chess move that forced the European nations into having to follow it. So we will learn about the Monroe Doctrine, which does become a really important facet of U.S. foreign policy. So we see this cartoon right here. This is not from the early 1800s. This cartoon is from the 1890s, 1910s. And what it is saying here basically is that the U.S. is going to be the policeman of North America. So this Monroe Doctrine becomes a foundational cornerstone of U.S. foreign policy. So much so that it is there's political cartoons about it into the 20th century. So it's really important. So the Monroe Doctrine and then Indian removal from their lands is occurring throughout this time. This is a major way the U.S. government is seeking to control and influence North America. Now, this one right here, we're not talking the Indian Removal Act during Andrew Jackson's presidency yet. This is Indian removal in general. So as a process, that is what is happening. The United States over time is removing Native Americans from the land and pushing them westward. Okay, so then we're going to switch gears. So far, those topics have mainly been political. But we'll switch gears at 4.5 and 4.6, and we're going to be looking at the economic history of the United States. So this first half of the 1800s is when the United States went through its first industrial revolution, which is called the market revolution, because it really focuses not just on technology change, but we're also going to see, we're going to move to a market system based more on capitalism. So they call it the market revolution, and it is spurred by technological advancements. So you can see behind me here, this is a spinning loom, right? So this is a factory for processing cotton into cloth. This man here, his name is Samuel Slater. He is the man who brought this technology into the United States. So we're going to see technological advancements such as the mill system, right, that we see right here, or the cotton gin in the South for harvesting cotton, and then government actions regarding things like infrastructure, which is a word for roads and canals and basically any of the structure you need to have a healthy economy. The government is going to support infrastructure, so this economic change is happening as a combination of both technological advancement and government action. And this market revolution is really going to center on cloth, on textiles. So the South is going to grow cotton, the North is going to produce the cotton, and as such, we have a kind of symbiotic relationship between the two regions. But they will always be in tension economically as well. So we'll cover that. Okay, and then the next topic, we're going to stick with this market revolution, but we're going to be looking at, let's see where to put myself this time. we're going to be looking at how the market revolution changes society and culture. So, industrialization spurred a wave of immigration into the United States because of jobs. So, we'll see some immigration into the US. And we're going to see a generalized increase in the standard of living. So, people are going to have more finished goods, they're going to have a little bit more free time. So, they'll have an increased standard of living. But we're going to also see an increase in the number of people working outside of the home. And so that increase of people working outside the home is going to drastically change home life and gender roles. And what we see, we're going to see something called the cult of domesticity develop, which is the idea that the home is a haven from the outside world, and women are going to be in charge of the home. Men will become in charge of work, and we're going to see separate spheres of public life and private life. So this is really drastically going to change society, because prior to this, we're looking at something where families lived on farms together and they all worked together. The wife may have been just as likely to be out in the field as the husband. There was a little bit less of a gender divide in roles, but working outside the home is going to change that a little bit. So we have this image behind me. I know it's kind of zoomed in, but that is our separate sphere, our private sphere. So after that, we're also going to look at expanding democracy. Now, this I've already kind of taught you when we were talking about voting leading up to the election. But here we have the idea that democracy is becoming more participatory across the United States. And there's going to be a move to universal white male suffrage. And states are going to begin dropping the property requirement to vote. So that's what we see here. These green states represent places where someone has to own property to be able to vote, and that's in the year 1800. In the year 1830, these pink states represent states where you have to be a taxpayer but not a property owner. And then the yellow states represent states with universal male suffrage. Any white male can vote regardless of property ownership or taxpayer status. So that's the change we're looking at. Along with this change is the continued growth of political parties. And this move is going to spur the rise of a populist, somebody who is supported at the grassroots level by voters, and that is going to be President Andrew Jackson. So when we're looking at Andrew Jackson in topic 4.8, he was an interesting president. He was considered the president of the common man because he was so powerful or popular with these new voters. And we will see during his presidency very contentious fighting between the political parties. So we have the Whig Party led by Henry Clay. Henry Clay is a congressman, and then we have the Democrats led by Andrew Jackson, the president. And this, as we study his presidency, we're really looking at the role of federal power versus states' rights. What does the federal government have power to do versus what do the states have the power to do? So the major topics for this one will be rechartering of the national bank, tariffs, which are taxes on imports. Can the government fund improvements in the country, things like roads and canals, for example? And then we will also see the Indian removal, so the removal of the 5 civilized tribes. This is the Cherokee Trail of Tears. In all of these, there will be fights, and we're going to see that Andrew Jackson consolidated federal power, even though he was not really a champion of a strong federal government. So one of the most famous primary sources, APUSH sources that you will have to know is this one of King Andrew, and we will examine it in depth. And you have probably seen this before from your 8th grade history. Okay, so let's move on to 4.9. This one, I think I'm going to stick myself right here. This is the development of an American culture. So this is an example of a nationalizing movement in the United States, a cultural movement. So this is not economics or politics, but there's a new national culture emerging in the first half of the 1800s. It's going to combine American elements with European influences, and then we will see regional cultural sensibilities. So we'll see a little bit of a difference in New England versus the South, for example. But what occurs is that we'll have liberal social ideas from abroad and the romantic beliefs in human perfectibility. So there's going to be this belief that humans can somehow develop into the ideal or the perfect. And that is going to influence literature, art, philosophy, architecture. And we'll look at some examples of these. But one of the major examples is on the back of this screen. This is a painting from the Hudson River School of Art. They were really trying to grab the wildness and just the massive beauty of the United States land, because that is very unique for the United States. Europe, for example, doesn't have this kind of wilderness. So we can see this painting. It's really quite stunning. And if you want to see some beautiful paintings, Google the Hudson River School of Art, and you'll see example after example of these. Okay, so we have an American culture. If we move forward, we're going to be learning about something called the Second Great Awakening. And this is a religious movement. You can see it's the Second Great Awakening. We had a First Great Awakening during time period too. What this is it's a religious movement that is really kind of entwined and influenced by this rise in democratic and individual beliefs. And this is a religious movement that is actually, it says, a response to rationalism. It's actually a rejection of rationalism. So this is a romantic movement based on faith, and it's the idea that humans cannot understand every single thing. You cannot logic every single thing. So what we see is these big, oh, my brain just left me. Give me a second. We see these big conferences. I can't even think of the word, kids. Revivals. That's what I want. We see these big revival meetings out in the woods where we have people coming to listen to traveling or itinerant preachers, and they're preaching about how there are things that cannot be explained through science. There are just universal truths in life. And this is largely in response to the changes from industrialization, and people felt a sense of like they lost control of their lives in a way because they're now working for other people and outside the homes. And so they seek control through religion. So this is kind of an interesting and major social movement in the early 1800s. It's about 1820s and 30s. This Second Great Awakening is going to spur an age of reform. So that takes us to our topic 411. So this is kind of a response to societal changes from the market revolution and combining the changes from the Second Great Awakening. There are reform movements that sweep the nation. So we see a number of utopias that people try to form. Some are more successful than others. None were enduring beyond a couple of decades. There is a temperance movement to try to prohibit alcohol or limit the drinking of alcohol in society. And then this is where this age of reform, we start to see a real abolition and anti-slavery movement emerge. So prior to about 1830, there are anti-slavery people, but not an organized abolition movement. But in response to industrialization, the growth of slavery from the cotton gin, and these new religious ideas, people begin to really push for the end of slavery. And we're also going to see women start to push for the right to vote in a more formalized way. So this is our age of reform. And then we just have two more topics for this unit. We're going to look over the entire unit and look at how the society for African Americans is developing, right? So these anti-slavery movements in the South are much different than anti-slavery movements in the North. So they consist mostly of unsuccessful slave rebellions. So we will add those slave rebellions to the slave rebellion we know about already, the Vesey Rebellion. We're going to see and learn about how enslaved Blacks and African Americans worked to create a sense of community within their subculture and to develop strategies that can protect their dignity and family structures. And this is really has a lot to do with the fact that families were continually broken up in the system of slavery. So there are many ways that we see them try to maintain and compensate for that. And then we will also see that when able, they join in the political efforts aimed at changing their status. So there will be a number of freed African Americans, for example, that are participating in abolition movements in the Underground Railroad, for example. So we want to look at this subculture and how this culture developed. And then the last topic for this unit is really it's important for us to look at because it's transitory, meaning it's going to transition us into that next unit of Unit 5, where we look at the Civil War and the ending of slavery. So we're going to finish up our study of time period 4 by looking at the society in the South. And what established in the South is a kind of caste system that we see here, kind of similar to the caste system that was established in Spanish colonies. So what we see in the South is that the majority of Southerners own no slaves. However, political leaders continue to argue that slavery is a part of the Southern way of life. And then what we see is an economy of the South, which continues to be or rely on agricultural exports, especially cash crops like cotton. And that's going to contribute to a distinctly Southern regional identity economically. So we have the social aspect of slavery, the economic aspect of exports, and that's going to influence the political leaders. And then what we see is that there's overcultivation on these plantations in the Southeast. So slave owners will begin to relocate west of the Appalachian Mountains. And so as a result, we're going to see the institution of slavery continue to grow during this time period, even though the founding fathers, when they wrote the Constitution, believed slavery was on its way out. So this will be the final topic that we look at. And throughout all of it, the major focus in terms of skill is going to be on causation. So as you study this, we're looking at cause and effect over and over. So causes and effects of geographic expansion, the causes of social changes, the effects of those changes, economic development, political developments, and we're really focusing national versus sectional here. And then the role of the United States in the world, for example. So throughout all of it, that's what we're really going to be looking at is causation. So as I close this video, I really enjoy teaching this unit. This unit is very interesting to me. This is this is what we call the antebellum period, which is the pre-war period, pre-Civil War period in the United States. So hopefully we have a good time, and we'll try to get this unit finished up by Christmas. So happy studying, Push?